Did you find that you and, at that stage, Bishop Pell had a similar viewpoint on theological questions?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Obviously, within the Catholic Church, there are a number of different viewpoints on different things, and I suppose you and he found yourselves to be relatively like-minded, is that right?
In many things.
Yes. And that seems to suggest there were or are things on which you are not of a like mind. What would those be?
I often would criticise the bishop for not being theologically particular. I always had the feeling that sometimes his way to explain things was too homespun, and because of that didn't give clarity in certain things. But then the retort of the cardinal would be that my thought was often as he would often say, too influenced by Greek theology. So it's just life experience differing formation, professing the one faith, being on the same page, but of course having different. We wouldn't have arguments, but we would have differences of emphases or how you might express something. But I think because of that, there was a relationship that developed because of that, mutual respect, I would say.
So it wasn't so much a question of different perspective, but different ways of explaining things or different ways of reasoning to a particular perspective. Would that be right?
Yes. Yes, the bishop's background was very clearly from the point of view of church history and with a particular interest in matters sociological, where I was more interested in things theological. And so different perspectives, but I suppose a cross-pollinisation happened.
You made a reference to you and the cardinal having different formation. What were you referring to there?
Oh, just different periods of, like the cardinal was prepared in the time of following the council. He was a student in Rome. The theological formation was much more classical and text-driven. So they used classical texts, and depending the subject you were studying, you followed through that particular text. Where the way that I was formed, we followed the method that was advocated at the time of the Second Vatican Council, called the historical method, where we'd follow through not just biblical evidence, but then at the teaching of the church through its great writers in the early period, then into the medieval period, and then the systematic development of the schoolmen, and then modern developments, and then following with a synthesis. So just, I suppose, a different way of studying. We're studying the same things, but in a different way.
And did you ever serve or act as Cardinal Pell's secretary?
No, never.
Now, you were appointed assistant priest in the parish of St. Patrick, Mentone, in 1992, and you served there until 1995, is that right?
That's correct. I'm still at Mentone, but my position as assistant priest concluded in 95.
Yes. And throughout the whole of that period, Cardinal Pell, although at that time bishop, was the parish priest for that parish, is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. And Bishop Pell was a consultor in the Archdiocese of Melbourne, as I have it, from 1992 until 1995. Are you aware of that?
The practice was all of the auxiliaries would be consultors, so yes, he would be a consultor.
Do you know whether Bishop Pell played any role in your appointment as assistant priest in Mentone?
I don't actually know, but I presume he had some say in it.
I suppose, given what you've described about the work that you and he were doing together before you became assistant priest there, that you wished to be appointed to that parish, is that right?
I was happy to be appointed. I had expressed no wish. We don't get asked. We're where we would be sent as assistant priests. I was just received the phone call from the Archbishop informing me that he was appointing me to Mentone.
That was Archbishop Little.
Archbishop Little.
Yes. And you don't know whether Bishop Pell had asked that you be appointed to his parish?
I don't know that.
Now, you and Bishop, as he was then, Pell, lived together in the same presbytery, as I understand it?
We lived in the bishop's house. The situation at the time of the parish of Mentone, there were two houses, the normal presbytery and then the then bishop's house, which were adjacent to one another. In the presbytery lived the dean, who was basically the priest who ran the parish. The bishop had the title parish priest, but because of his involvement in the diocese generally and locally, there was a priest deputed to look after what normally a parish priest would do, and he had the title of dean. That was Father Teal, was the priest when I arrived, and then also in the presbytery living with him was another priest, Father Martin Leach, who had a disability. And because of the confined space, I lived in the house next door, as my predecessor had, Father Johnson. So it was just for the reason of space, but also, I suppose, to give the bishop some company as well.
And did anyone else live in the bishop's house other than you and the bishop?
There was a resident housekeeper who lived in her own section towards the back of the house.
And so, as I understand it, the dean, Teal, the other assistant priest, Leach, and you had responsibility for running the parish, is that right?
That's correct.
And did the bishop have any particular responsibility for that parish, given his appointment as parish priest?
He did have responsibility as the parish priest, so I think the manner that it worked is he generally would discuss policy with the dean, but leave the day-to-day running to the dean. But he would, for example, offer his mass each day in the parish church. He took seriously that role. The people knew him. He was always with us for the great feasts of Christmas and Easter, and then any other time when throughout the year he wasn't in one of the other parishes on the weekends celebrating confirmation or other events, he would normally take his part on the roster of Sunday masses and weekday masses in the church.
So you and the bishop worked together on parish matters?
Yes.
And you worked together also on the other matters relating to the cardinal's work on the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, is that right?
Yes, spasmodically.
Yes. And other theological matters too? The writing and engaging and so on that you discussed earlier?
Yes.
And did you and he publish together at all?
Never.
And I suppose at that time you forged a close relationship with Bishop Pell?
Yes.
Then you were appointed Dean of the Parish of St. Patrick, Mentone, in the period, and you served in that position in the period 1995 to 1998, is that right?
Yes.
And so that was, I suppose, to replace Dean Teal, would that be right?
Yes.
So you, whilst Bishop Pell was formerly in the position of parish priest, you as Dean, as you put it earlier, was responsible for running the parish, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And Bishop Pell then was parish priest whilst you were dean for a period of a year or two, is that right?
Yes. Until he was appointed Archbishop of Melbourne.
Yes. And in February 1998, you were appointed parish priest of that parish, the same parish, and you've been there ever since then, is that right? There was an amalgamation, I think, with another parish along the way, is that right?
Yes. In February 1998, I was appointed parish priest because that practice of the auxiliary bishop residing in the parishes and having the title parish priest ceased. But then our now Archbishop Hart was appointed the auxiliary bishop with care for the southern region. But he, unlike his predecessors, had the role of Vicar General as well. So he made a decision that it was too far for him to live out in the provinces, and he chose to live closer to the city. And so that's why then the office of parish priest became vacant, and I was appointed parish priest of Mentone. Along the way, the parish, which was a separate parish next door, the smaller parish of East Parkdale, when the priest there retired, an older man, I was appointed the administrator to have care of that place as well. Then a little longer after that, I was made the parish priest. But then once we had both parishes and had both parishes working together, we dialogued about the viability of forming one parish. And so that's when, canonically, each parish is dissolved and a new parish entity created, and that's why I'm parish priest of the new parish of Mentone Parkdale.
Yes, thank you, Father. And then Bishop Pell was installed as the Metropolitan Archbishop of Melbourne on the 6th of July 1996. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And I'm sure as one of the priests of the diocese, you attended his installation, if that's the right word?
I did.
Yes. And he was then your Archbishop for the duration of his time as Archbishop of Melbourne. That's from July 96 to March of 2001, is that right?
Yes.
So he was your Archbishop for some 5 years or so, is that right?
That's correct.
And as I understand it, when Bishop Pell was auxiliary bishop, he was bishop for the southern region of Melbourne, is that right?
That's correct.
And the parish of Mentone was in that region.
Yes.
And as such, Bishop Pell had particular responsibilities in relation to priests within that region.
I don't know whether you'd say he had particular responsibility, but he had an interest in the priests.
What does it mean to be the bishop of a particular region of the Archdiocese of Melbourne in those days?
It's a very good question. Living with the bishop and hearing comments from other bishops who are auxiliaries of the Archdiocese of Melbourne, they often complained about their lack of authority. In fact, often they called themselves acolytes, that they weren't often involved in things enough. The former Bishop Kelly used to actually remark at ordination ceremonies, you'll be ordained a priest now, you'll have some authority. When you're a parish priest, you'll have even more authority, and if you're unlucky to be named a bishop, you'll have all authority, an auxiliary bishop, you'll have all authority taken from you. And that was one of the realities, that so often the auxiliary bishops of Melbourne, in practice, were just often viewed as the men who went around doing confirmation.
What do you mean by authority?
Well, authority and power often come together, the power to do something. So in church understanding of being able to impose or ask or correct, you could admonish, but the one who could discipline or actually bring about a change or effect was only the ordinary, the Archbishop. Because the reality of auxiliary bishops are really a new phenomenon in the church since the time of the Second Vatican Council. Previously, there was just a bishop of a diocese. Auxiliary bishops, or what we often called titular bishops, bishops in name, were often just in the Roman Curia or in positions where they didn't have the care of souls. But I suppose with a bludgeoning or burgeoning of populations and more demand for things, they started creating more and more assistant bishops.
Do you know of the evidence we've had about the role of assistant bishops in the Melbourne Archdiocese?
I've read a little, yes. I've read a little of some of the
Have you read
comments.
Archbishop Hart's evidence?
Some of it. I saw some of his commentary.
And do you understand the management structure of the diocese, do you?
I understand it, yes. But basically.
And how the committees were organised. Do you understand that?
I would still hold that even today the auxiliary bishops do not have a lot of say in things.
But do you understand how the committees were organised? That was the question I asked
Oh,
you.
sorry, the committees.
Yeah, around the Archbishop.
Yes, but well, basically...
Do you understand their roles?
I understood the consultors and the personal advisory board. I would understand what their tasks would be. And then I'm a member myself of the Archbishop's Council of Priests, which is another body which meets.
You've never been a consultant, have you?
Never.
And never been on the advisory board?
No.
Power or authority or otherwise, I understand from your evidence that as the Bishop for the Southern Region of the Archdiocese of Melbourne, Bishop Pell took a special interest in the priests in his region, is that right?
Yes, he tried to, I think, as I said, first of all, to get to know them himself, because he wasn't a priest of the diocese, so he didn't have that foreknowledge, but then just to try and encourage the priests to work together and to get to know to one another and be on the same page, so we're not just sort of doing differing things in different parishes, so we want to have a common heart and mind.
Now, Father, you've identified various, if I can use the word roles, in which you had responsibilities in relation to Bishop Pell, being as his assistant priest at one point, subsequently his dean, also assisting him on his work in the Congregation with the Doctrine of the Faith, and also the work that you and he did with regard to theological matters that you mentioned, and then also that he became your archbishop and you were a parish priest within his archdiocese. Are there any other positions or roles that you served in relation to Bishop, as he was then, Pell, or indeed subsequently Cardinal Pell?
No.
Did you attend Archbishop Pell's installation as Archbishop of the Diocese of Sydney?
I did.
Now, I understand, Father, you are chairman of the Australian Confraternity of Catholic Clergy, is that right?
I am.
And that's a grouping that was founded in 1985.
Yes.
Was or is Cardinal Pell a founding member or a member of that organisation?
No, he's not a member.
Not at all?
No.
And hasn't been?
No. As far as I know, he doesn't belong to any of the priests' associations.
And is that, would that be expected because of his position as bishop and then archbishop and then cardinal?
Not expected, but I think a choice on his part not to belong to any particular grouping.
And this particular grouping espouses a conservative theology of priesthood and sexual morality, is that right?
No, it espouses the belief of the Catholic Church as she teaches it.
Well, there are different perspectives and teachings within the Catholic Church, aren't there, Father?
There might be perspectives, but when it comes to what we believe, that's clearly laid out in, for example, the Catechism of the Catholic Church and the canons and teaching of the Church. So clear matters. There can be disagreement and dispute or differing approaches about how you explain it, how one thing relates to the other, but the clear, what we'd say, dogmatic points are not variable.
And what is the organising principle of this Australian Confraternity of Catholic Clergy? What is it that holds them together?
Well, there exists in canon law, in the canons which relate to the clergy, the right of free association of the clergy for the purposes of advancing themselves intellectually, spiritually, and from a point of view of support. And that's the idea of the confraternity. It's not a trade union or a lobby group. It's simply a free association of priests who come together in an annual conference with designated speakers to pursue particular areas of interest. Might have been something topical or something which members have brought up they would like more addressed. But then it's also to come together, support one another in prayer. It's because it's a national group, it meets in local chapters. So in Melbourne, we would meet every month for a holy hour, so a time of prayer together, and then just some social time. Then there'll be other ad hoc meetings. So it's simply a means of giving spiritual and practical support to priests, and that's all it is.
Father, does the group talk about suggestions that are made and have been made to us about change in the church, such as the greater role of women? Is that talked about amongst your group?
Not particularly, no.
What would the attitude of the group be to that?
Well, it depends what you mean by the involvement of women. If it's those things which pertain to the nature of the priesthood and the authority which is linked with the sacrament of orders, well, that's not a possibility in Catholic understanding. But if you look at the broader role of involvement in decision-making at a general level, that's very possible and often does happen.
Well, there's been a suggestion given to us that consultants should include women.
Well, that's not permissible in law, so it's because of the nature of there's a tension that has existed and still exists in understanding what is the relationship between the exercise of authority and the sacrament of holy order. Now, it has always been a debated point since the Middle Ages. For example, it comes to a head in the understanding of the nature of what is a bishop. The medieval model actually considered a bishop to be, first of all, a priest who was then, by the delegation or the authority of the Pope, given jurisdiction. So he was basically a priest plus jurisdiction. But then another strand of theology and argument would say that the understanding of authority, in the sense of our Lord gave us what we call it the triple works of teaching and sanctifying and governance, so governance or ruling, that is tied to the sacrament of order. And so this had always been a debate that's gone on, and in fact at the time of the Second Vatican Council, the Church moved more definitively to defining the fact that there is a favouring the relationship between order and jurisdiction. And so, for example, it came to a head when the new Code of Canon Law was being drawn up following the Council in the 1982. It was promulgated, and it came to the question of judgments in marriage tribunals. So up until then, all judges had to be priests, or had to be in holy order. And it was being debated whether it was permissible for those who are not ordained to be involved in judgment. And I know it went back and forth with the various canonists and theologians, where they arrived at the point where it was a point that they weren't able to decide on because it was theological, but they admitted that laymen and women could be involved in judgment as long as they sat in panel and were not a majority. So I think that just reveals some of the tensions that are there.
Well, it also suggests that the Church, although may be slow, is capable of change. Is that right?
It may, but it's the whole idea of a theological tradition which is constant. The essence of Catholicism is that it tries to remain true consistently to what it has received. And so you can't change, you could develop, but you can't change something which we would hold in faith we've received from our Lord and has been passed on.
Common law.
You mean from the Bible?
From our Lord. The Bible, Catholics believe in tradition and Holy Scripture. And so there's an essential difference in the understanding of revelation between revelation.
I understand also that there is great controversy in the Church about some of these issues. Is that right?
There's always been controversy in the Church.
And there is today?
Certainly.
And the group which you're talking about, I take it, is on the conservative side of that controversy.
Well, I presume.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe we might have a cup of tea.
Father, this Australian Confraternity of Catholic Clergy, you said, held an annual conference, is that right?
Yes.
And other conferences or seminars?
No other conference other than an annual conference, but there can be local gatherings, whether it be in Perth or Melbourne, for whoever is in that area. But they're just not conferences, they're just meetings.
And was Cardinal Pell ever invited to speak at one of these annual conferences?
Yes.
Yes, several times?
Over the course of 20 years, probably 2 or 3 times, I would think.
Yes. And so the conservative side of the controversy that you said that the organisation was aligned with is, of course, aligned with Cardinal Pell's well-known views on the church controversies. Would that be right?
I don't know if that would be correct. I mean, we don't see ourselves as being aligned in that way. We just are trying to be faithful Catholic priests, trying to find out more and more what the church teaches. That's why we study it. Trying to help priests to live it. When there are new documents that come out, we try and study them and get to the heart of them and see how we can implement them and see how they help us. If that's considered conservative, then I suppose we're conservative.
Well, you accepted that Father, you accepted that the organisation is on the conservative side of the controversy.
That's how people describe things, and so that's why I said yes.
And Cardinal Pell is also on the conservative side of the controversy.
I presume so.
Yes. And you are involved in the Australian chapter of the US-based group Courage, is that right?
No.
No?
No.
Do you know the group?
I do. I was a chaplain, but in late 80s, early 90s. So I haven't had any involvement with the Courage for, it's been 20 years, I would think.
Okay. Was it that you were appointed to be chaplain to that group after a visit by Father John Harvey to Australia, is that right?
I think Father John Harvey had come to Australia at the invitation of I think it was the St Vincent's Bioethics Centre, and he was giving talks on ministry to same-sex attracted people, and the Archbishop asked me if I would be prepared to assist. But I wasn't the chaplain, I was like the junior. There was a senior priest, Father Philip Smith, who was the chaplain of the group. So I simply would go along to the meetings and give some spiritual talks, but the group by its nature is run by the members themselves.
Was that not in 2008, that visit by Father John Harvey?
If you say it would be. It was earlier on in my, yes, I wasn't a priest all that long, 2008.
Well, you'd been a priest a long time by 2008.
Oh, yes, no, it wasn't. It was well before then.
And that group was founded by the now late Father John Harvey, is that right?
That's correct.
And the group claims or espouses the view that the sexual orientation of homosexual people can be changed, is that right?
No, it doesn't.
What is its central message?
The message of Courage is that people with same-sex attraction need support and help from one another. They need good friendship. They need spiritual advice and help to deal with their situation. The I think the founders of Courage, or the psychologists who might give some input, would admit that it is possible for someone to heal the same-sex attraction ambiguity that some might have, but more often than not, they work on the principle that this is something accepted and it's helping people to live with that and to work with it in the best way that they can, in line with Catholic moral principles.
Did you know Father Pickering?
Father Pickering was the parish priest of Gardenvale, where I grew up in the parish of Gardenvale. Father Pickering came to Gardenvale when I was in the seminary in about my third or fourth year. I knew him. In fact, he preached at my first Mass.
And did you know about his sexual activity with youth?
Definitely not.
Not at all?
No.
Now, your statement, I withdraw that. Have you kept contact with Cardinal Pell since he left Melbourne for Sydney in 2001?
Yes. Occasional, we might, by keeping contact, it would be when he was visiting, or if I happened to be in Sydney, which was rarely, our paths might cross. Normally, when he was visiting Melbourne, staying with his sister, there'd normally be a social event with some of his priest friends, and that's how we would catch up.
And you would count yourself as one of the Cardinal's priest friends?
Yes.
Were you in contact with him in 2001?
2001. I presume. 2001, where were we? Was he in Sydney then?
Well, he was installed in Sydney on 10 May 2001 as the Archbishop of that archdiocese.
Well, as I said, I attended his installation, and I probably saw him a couple of times in that year. If he came to Melbourne, I would think yes, would have been.
Other than in person at the kinds of gatherings that you've mentioned, did you keep in contact with him after he left Melbourne in other ways? For example, writing?
No.
By email?
Very rarely. No, I don't think so.
Telephone?
The Cardinal himself doesn't use email.
And you know that, Father?
I know that from his secretary saying he's a antediluvian when it comes to computers.
And you use email, Father?
Yes.
Yes. Telephone?
No, I didn't. Well, there could have been a phone call, but we normally didn't keep up like a phone call. Our only contact, really, from when he went to Sydney would have been just the occasional social occasion.
And how would you know that there was to be a social occasion to which you were invited, let's say, when he was visiting Melbourne?
Normally one of the other priests who was a friend might say the Cardinal's coming to Melbourne and he'd like to catch up with the priests, and he might say we're going to have dinner I'll put on dinner at my place or something like that.
And you've said already in 2002 there was an occasion in which you picked up the Cardinal, or probably Archbishop at that stage, from his sister's house. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Other than that occasion, were there other occasions in 2002 when you had contact with the Cardinal?
Not that I can recall. I may have, but I can't. Nothing that stands out clearly.
So this kind of relationship of occasional contact at social occasions, did that continue, and has that continued through till recent times?
Yes, it has.
Yes. So when last did you see the Cardinal?
I last saw the Cardinal in November last month when I was on holidays. Myself and another priest were on holidays. We'd been on a European tour, and I finished my last few days in Rome, and so I had dinner with the Cardinal and his secretary.
Who's the Cardinal's secretary whom you're referring to?
Father Mark Whittos, priest of Melbourne, who is his secretary in Rome.
Yes. And you say that was in November?
difference. I returned to Australia on the 19th of November, so it would have been probably about the 17th.
And have you spoken to the Cardinals since then?
No,
Not on the telephone?
no.
And
Did you talk about the Royal Commission when you met him in Rome? Did you talk about this Royal Commission when you had dinner with him in Rome?
Just obliquely that it was coming up, and he was trying his best to prepare. But that was basically, I think we tried to keep off the topic.
Why did you do that?
Well, I think it was weighing heavily on him. I couldn't get over how poorly he looked when I saw him last month. He put on a lot of weight. He's not moving very well, and I just thought his general demeanour was very grey. In look, he was very ashen and grey.
You didn't talk about anything that might be raised with the Cardinal?
No. This matter of making my statement wasn't mentioned to
I'm
me.
not suggesting that, but
No.
there's a lot of other things the Cardinal will talk to us about, and you didn't talk
No, we
to him
really
about
just spoke
anything at all?
We just spoke about basically general church things like the Synod of Bishops just concluded, those sorts of things. And of course there were, it was just a gathering of priests, so it was, and then we're talking about his sister and who's not well, and so it's just general chatter like that. I was only with him. It was only a brief luncheon at his apartment. It was about an hour and a half over lunch.
So how did you come to the view that the Commission was weighing upon him?
He said it was. He said he's worried, and his secretary told me how much it's weighing upon him. Just how his health has declined, and pressures at the Roman end, and then preparing for this, he just noted how his health was declining.
Father, was it a dinner or a luncheon that you saw the Cardinal?
In Rome?
Yes.
Luncheon.
Luncheon. Because you first said it was a dinner, then you said it was a luncheon.
Well, we often use that phrase interchangeably, I'm sorry. So it was the meal, midday meal, or 1:30 Roman time. So.
And do I understand you to have said you didn't discuss the matter of the allegations made by David Ridsdale and the particular telephone conversation at all?
No.
And the possibility of you giving evidence?
No.
Now, your statement mentions that, as he was then, the Bishop Pell had a habit of reading the morning papers. Do you have a habit of reading the papers?
Yes.
Yes. And what print media do you typically read?
Well, we used to read all three papers, so it would be the Melbourne Herald Sun, the Age and the Australian. All three papers would be present.
Yes. And do you watch television news from time to time?
Yes.
Or current affairs programs?
Occasion, more the news and current affairs programs.
You keep yourself relatively up to date with political and other public affairs?
Yes.
Yes. And do you follow online media at all?
Only sort of church-related matters. I'm not much into the print media, into the online stuff so much. No.
But I take it in the media generally you would follow matters about the church that are publicly reported on.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes.
Now, David Ridsdale, as I understand it, publicly discussed his 1993 conversation with Bishop Pell in 1995 in Who magazine. Did that come to your attention then?
I don't believe so, no.
And then again, the fact of that conversation and what David Ridsdale has to say about it was published in 1997 in Outrage magazine. Did that come to your attention?
No.
You didn't hear about them at all?
Not that I can recall then. I would have thought that the general murmurings or bubbling up about talk about Gerald Ridsdale and related matters would have been more just to 2000 on, just on the clerical grapevine, there was talk that Ridsdale was under investigation, or there are allegations about him that had bubbled up. But before that, if it had, I didn't take note of it.
Are you sure about that, Father?
Yes.
2000s.
Okay. Around that time, all I can think of is just the general murmurings of difficulties, of allegations started emerging. The name Ridsdale, I suppose, because it wasn't Archdiocese of Melbourne, I suppose I didn't take particular notice, but then there was just the talk, because he wasn't a man I knew.
Will you, in your statement, deal with having watched on television the occasion on which Bishop Pell had accompanied Gerald Ridsdale to court? Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you had watched it on television with the bishop on the very day that had occurred, is that right?
Yes.
On the television news that evening?
Yes.
And it was a matter of some public controversy?
Yes.
Do you know when that was, Father?
Well, I think it was sometime in 2005, but I couldn't tell you exactly when.
1993, Father.
1993?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, 1993, sorry. Yes, I'm just getting confused with dates, sorry. 1993, a little later on from the time of the phone call. Yes.
Yes. And certainly by then, if not well before, the matter of Gerald Ridsdale was commonly known amongst priests, even in Melbourne.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I think those dates I said earlier, I got confused. So,
you were out by a decade.
Yeah, I take back -10. I'm sorry about that. I just got confused.
Yes. And Father, returning to the question that I was really asking you about, which was about David Ridsdale, not Gerald Ridsdale, when was it that you first came to know that David Ridsdale said that he had had a telephone conversation with Bishop Pell, in which Bishop Pell had asked him what he would require to keep silent, or to that effect?
Well, it would have been that early in February in 1993, when the phone call came through.
Yeah. And you heard that that's what David Ridsdale said with regard to that phone call then in 1993?
The words that the Cardinal used to me when he came back from his...
Father, you're being asked a different question.
Sorry.
Mr. Stewart, do it again.
I'll ask it again, Father. You say in your statement that you knew about a telephone call between Bishop Pell and David Ridsdale immediately after it had taken place, not so?
Yes.
Yes. Now I'm asking you a different question. I'm asking you when you first came to know that David Ridsdale said of that telephone call that Bishop Pell had asked him how much he required in order to be silent or to keep quiet about his sexual abuse by Gerald Ridsdale.
The first time I knew of that was that 60 Minutes program in 2002, just watching on television.
Right, so it was broadcast, as I understand it, in 2001, and then it was rebroadcast in 2002. Are you...
It would have been the first time in 2001.
The first time.
Correct, yeah.
Yes. So earlier when you mentioned 2002, really you were referring to the first time, so that would be 2001, would it?
Yes, 2001.
So you knew then what David Ridsdale said about that telephone conversation?
Yes.
And in that program, you may recall it's in two parts. The first part, David Ridsdale gave his version of the telephone conversation, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And in the second part, that version was played to Cardinal Pell, and he responded, is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
And so you saw on television Cardinal Pell giving his version of that telephone conversation, is that right?
I saw it then. I don't know if I've seen it since, but yes.
Yes. So at the time that, or at least within the bounds time-wise of the same television program, at the time that you heard David Ridsdale's version, you also heard the Cardinal's version?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. The 60 Minutes was 2 programs.
Right. I would have seen both.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Did you see both?
Oh, I think I did, yes. I'm sure I did.
You're not sure?
No, I'm sure I watched it again, I'm sure.
And did you see them both in 2001?
Yes. When it first appeared, I saw it. Of course, there was the advertising beforehand, so we knew it was coming on, so I made sure I watched it.
So you watched it. And at home?
At home, it would have been, yes, at the presbytery at Mentone. Yes.
Which that would have been. Do you remember it being at home?
Oh, yes.
You do?
I wouldn't be anywhere else.
And who was with you at the time?
2001. I doubt anybody. I would have been alone.
Did you live alone then, did you?
2000. I'm not sure if I had an assistant priest then, but even if I did, attended when it came to viewing television to watch your own, we didn't sit together watching television. I just can't remember whether I had an assistant priest then. I don't think I did. I think I was on my own by then.
Was it your habit to watch 60 Minutes at the time?
Oh, often, yeah. Often I would watch it. Sunday night, sort of the beginning of day off, so that's why you'd finish for the day and you'd watch a bit of telly.
And normally, I think 60 Minutes promotes what's coming.
Yes.
Did you see a promotion for what was coming?
Oh, I think so, yes.
Do you remember?
I'm pretty sure that, that I knew it, and priests had said 60 Minutes is on. George is on this evening or something.
Sorry, what's on this evening?
The Cardinal would be on 60 Minutes this evening.
The Cardinal?
Yeah.
When did he become a Cardinal?
Oh. I don't know.
So are you sure that they said the Cardinal's on
we
this?
Probably said George. I was just being respectful. So we would have said George is on tonight.
So it was a matter of discussion amongst the priests that the program was coming up, was it?
Yes.
And I take it a matter of discussion amongst the priests after the program had gone to air.
It was, yes.
September 2003, Your Honour, on the Cardinal question. Did you follow the proceedings of the Royal Commission at all in May of this year?
No, I did not.
When David Ridsdale gave evidence as to this telephone conversation, did you see that at all, followed?
I didn't see it, but I read the transcript.
You read the transcript?
Yes.
And you must have seen some of the media. There was considerable media attention.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yes. And when did you read the transcript? At the time or subsequently?
I don't think... Yes, I think I read it probably a couple of days afterwards. I went online and had a read of things.
So you knew from that coverage then that it was the intention that the Cardinal will come and give evidence before this Royal Commission about that telephone call, amongst other things?
Yes.
Yes. So you were expecting since May 2015 that the Cardinal would come and give evidence about that call?
Yes.
Yes. And did you contact the Cardinal or any representative of the Cardinal to offer your recollections with regard to that call?
No.
other than the occasion in 2002 or 2001, it doesn't matter, that you told us about earlier when you mentioned to the Cardinal your recollection. Was there any other occasion in which you mentioned to the Cardinal directly or through anyone else your recollection of that telephone call?
No.
Yes. Now, tell us exactly what happened, or would you give evidence exactly what happened?
Sorry, just come back a step. When you watched the program, you say you're watching it on your own.
Yes.
Just said to Mr. Stewart you'd never told anyone before the conversation you had with the Cardinal about your recollection. Is that right?
No, I didn't. I would have spoken to other priests after, when that program came to air. I would have spoken to other priests saying that's not how I recollect that day.
You would have, or
I did.
you did.
Just my friends. Yep.
Can you remember any of their names?
I would have been Monsignor Portelli and Father Girolami.
They're still alive?
Yes.
Did you pick up the telephone and ring Cardinal Pell and say they've got it wrong?
No. It was only when the next time I met him, when I picked him up at his sister's house to go to a social event that just make him talk, I mentioned it. I said that program was, not reported things that not as I remember you on that day.
Not as I remember you.
You said how he was, his reaction.
So you're talking about how he looked.
Yep.
You said, as I understood it, Father, that you read David Ridsdale's testimony, the transcript from the Royal Commission hearing earlier this year. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you read any of the other witnesses' testimony?
I flicked through some, yes. I didn't read everything, but I had a general.
The particular reason why you chose to read David Ridsdale's transcript?
No, just out of interest, I suppose. I read through, and I went back then, I think, and probably read it again. I've read it again since, but I remember I did have a look then.
When did you last read it?
I'd say 2 weeks ago.
Now, setting out the events one by one, and I'll break it down if necessary, how did it come about that you prepared this statement? Who contacted you?
I was contacted by Dr. Michael Casey, who was formerly the Cardinal's secretary, personal assistant, saying that he rang me and said the Cardinal, going through his notes, had made a note that I had made comment to him in 2002 or 1, whichever the year was, about, in a conversation with him, I'd said that how I remembered that day, that morning when the phone call came through, and that how I'd said that I did not sense that the reaction was as had been reported.
When was that? In other words, when did Dr. Michael Casey contact you?
I came home from overseas on the 19th of November. It must have been about was in that first week of my being home, from between the 19th and the 26th of November. The actual day I couldn't say. But it was just a phone call.
At the time that you and the Cardinal were in the car and you had picked him up from his sister's home, were you aware that he had taken a note of what you'd said?
No. No idea.
You didn't take a note while he was sitting with you in the car?
No.
So Michael Casey phoned you in the week of the 19th to the 26th of November, and he said the Cardinal had been going through his notes, and he had a note of the recollection that you had had as to the day in question.
Yes.
And then how did your conversation with Dr. Michael Casey proceed?
And then I was asked, would I be prepared to make a statement about my recollection of that occasion? And I said I would.
Yes, and then what was arranged in that regard?
So then the legal team of the Cardinal contacted me,
Who contacted you?
Mr. De Rosario.
And when was that?
Would have been, what is the date that I signed the document, please, so that'll help me,
The statement is dated 5 December.
which was the day of the week, 5th of December.
It was a Saturday.
Yeah, it would have been Wednesday or Thursday I was contacted.
So the Wednesday or Thursday immediately preceding the 5th.
Yeah.
And in between those two contacts, the one from Dr. Michael Casey and the other one from Mr. De Rosario, had you had any contact with anyone else on this question of you possibly furnishing a statement?
No, only from the initial contact with Dr. Casey, and then the only contact after that would have been Mr. De Rosario.
And what did Mr. De Rosario say to you with regard to?
He just chatted to me about what my recollections were. Then I jotted some points down and forwarded them to him, and he put them into a statement form and asked if that was correct. And it was, and then after we'd agreed on the statement, it was then forwarded to me, and I signed it and sent it in.
And this was done by email?
I sent the signed copy by email, and then couriers, I think, picked up the original on the Monday, which I think might have been the first sitting day or something. Yeah.
Yes, Father. Going back to the jotted down the points, you said that Mr. De Rosario spoke to you, and you jotted down some points which you sent to him. Was that by email?
I think the original discussion would have been just dialogue over the telephone. Then some points came back to me, which I then made comment on, and then the form of the statement was finalised, and then it was all formatted for me, and then I signed it and had it witnessed.
And the emails dealing with that, were those between you and Mr. De Rosario, or between you and someone else at the same firm of solicitors?
No, me, Mr. De Rosario.
Your Honour, I call for the Cardinal's note in respect to the conversation back in 2002 or thereabouts, which Dr. Casey is said to have referred to in the conversation with the witness in November of this year. And I call for all the notes and emails on this subject with regard to the evidence of Father Walsh in the possession of the solicitors of the Cardinal.
Mr. Duggan?
Your Honour, Commissioners, I don't read the legislation as allowing counsel assisting to be able to make a call for documents. My understanding is that the process is that a summons be
Well, would you like a summons, or would you like to produce them?
Well, I don't have instructions either way on that.
I can sign a summons now if you'd like.
Well, I would,
Would you
I
prefer?
think that's the appropriate
All right,
course.
we'll
for
have
the
a
summons
summons.
to be
We'll have a summons drawn, and I'll sign it.
issued. And I'll take some instructions on being able to respond to that summons.
In the process of the preparation of your statement, Father, what were you told with regard to what was required of you?
All I was told was if I could put in my own words my recollection of what occurred on that morning of the phone call, and my recollection of my understanding of the response of the then bishop to that event. and then the latter event of the news, watching the news with his accompanying Ridsdale to court.
Were you given any documents?
No documents.
In your statement, you say that you've read the statement of David Ridsdale. Which statement is that?
That was I read the transcript of the interview.
So you're referring to the transcript
The
published?
part that referred to that call that day.
That was published on the Royal Commission website. Was that furnished to you by someone, or did you look it
No,
up?
I found it myself.
And when did you do that?
That would have been once I was asked. I went and read that part of the transcript just to refresh my memory and to see what was being said and why I had that recollection of responding in a different way.
And that was after you had given your recollections to Mr. De Rosario on the telephone, is that right?
I would have given initial response, and then I would have read the transcript myself and then tweaked a few things, I think. There wasn't much change, I don't think, more the manner of expression than anything else.
So you read what Mr. De Rosario sent back to you?
I did.
Was it explained to you at all why you were being asked for this now and not sometime earlier in the preceding period since 2002?
No.
Did you ask to be able to see any other documents or material?
No.
Were any other documents or materials offered to you?
No.
Were you told by Mr. De Rosario what Cardinal Pell says about that telephone call?
No.
Now, you say in your statement that you could tell from the bishop's face that he was upset.
Yes.
Now, what is it about the bishop's face? What physical or other features are you referring to?
I think the setting was important. It was early February. The bishop had then returned from his annual holiday. So he was refreshed and looked bright and vital. He'd been away as normal with his sister and other family members down the beach. It would have been the first week back. I think school had got back. It was normal life starting up in parish. He looked, bright and refreshed. When he came back from his phone call, I just saw this, I suppose the look I'd describe, crestfallen look. He was sort of like he diminished in himself. He looked sort of grey, almost that ashen look. And when you've known the bishop for a while, the look that he has when he's angry or agitated is a very different look. He gets pursed lips and almost this white ring around the lips. If he's upset, you read the signs. This was a completely different reaction. And that's why I said, "Are you okay?" Because he just looked awful.
Did you consider putting this in your statement, Father? How the bishop actually looked? Isn't that...
Well, I think I said that, but maybe I didn't give enough detail.
Well, you didn't give any detail. You said you could tell from his face that he was upset. You didn't say anything about his face in your statement.
No, just the demeanour had changed. That was...
in my submission, that's an unfair question given what he says in paragraph 8. He does appear to describe it.
Well, the witness can respond then, Mr. Duggan.
Were you not asked what it is that you observed?
I was, and I described what I observed as a change in his demeanour, that was, I think I said in my description to them, crestfallen, but obviously it didn't get included in the statement.
And this is some 23 years after the event, Father?
Yes.
You remember the bishop's face
Yes.
and how it looked 23 years later?
Not exactly, but I know the demeanour was so changed in the course of a short time.
Well, in paragraph 8, you mention the bishop's demeanour. Now, what is it about his demeanour that you observed?
Well, he's a big man and was like, as I said, crestfallen. Literally, it's like he just had reduced in himself. His face dropped, his shoulders had dropped. You could tell he'd had a shock.
He'd had a shock.
Well, that's how I do it, like someone who's had a shock.
And if someone had just sworn at him in the telephone call, rebuffing, as it's put in David Ridsdale's version, an effort by the bishop to pay him off, he would look shocked, wouldn't he?
He may.
Nothing inconsistent, is there, in the physical observations that you make of the cardinal and the version of the telephone call that David Ridsdale gives?
I think there is, because the description that then Bishop Pell was irritated and angry were not reflected in the demeanour as I knew the man when he came back from the phone call.
Of course, David Ridsdale wasn't observing the man, was he? He was just on a phone call with him.
That's right.
That's right. And I suggest that someone such as the bishop emerging from a telephone call on David Ridsdale's version of it would just as likely look crestfallen and shocked as you've described.
That could be true, except that the accompanying comments, in a sense, elucidate what seemed to be his demeanour.
Well, that's the point, is it? You really draw on what the bishop told you about that telephone call, don't you?
Certainly.
Because that was what gave you knowledge about the substance of the call.
Yes.
Yes. And in your own mind, you're not able to separate out 23 years later whether your memories of the bishop on that day are drawn from what he told you. I withdraw that. You're not able to separate out 23 years later what part of your memory of that phone call is drawn from what the bishop said and what you observed with regard to his physical features.
No, I wouldn't agree. I would remember the look on his face, because I was the one who initiated the conversation when I said, "What's wrong?" And because of the look on the face, I remember that. And that's when the reports came in later about this angry conversation, I would, from my own experience of dealing with the bishop, when he'd been angry, it was a completely different look. That's my association.
Now, you say, Father, that you initiated the conversation. You don't say that in your statement.
Can we just go? Can I see my earlier part of the statement, please?
I can give you a hard copy if that'll help.
That's okay.
You see in paragraph 7, you say, my recollection is that I could tell from his face that Bishop Pell was upset, and he spoke to me immediately after his call with David Ridsdale. Do you see that?
And he spoke because I did initiate. So I simply said, what's up?
And in paragraph 8,
and that's when he responded. And I think that it was something to the effect Ridsdale's even played up with his nephew. He didn't mention a name. I wouldn't have known. It's only in later knowledge that I know the name David, but it was his nephew.
you didn't hear either side of the actual telephone conversation, did you?
Either side of the... Sorry, I don't understand.
You didn't hear the telephone conversation, either person,
No.
David Ridsdale or Bishop Pell.
The setup of the house is dining room, lounge, and then office. There's a long distance, and the door would have been closed. I heard nothing.
And you didn't...
Father, is this an old house or a modern house?
It's built in 1971.
So it's fairly solid construction.
Solid construction, yes.
And that explains why you couldn't hear.
Yeah, and it's quite... The layout is not like a normal family home. It's a rather large dining room. So there's the kitchen at the end and the housekeeper's quarters, then onto the dining room, which is a long rectangular room. Then alongside that parallel is a large lounge, and then off that at one corner is a rather large office, which was the bishop's office.
The cardinal was in the office.
In the office.
Where were you when he came back to you?
In the dining room. So basically two.
So you had to
rooms
walk through 2 rooms to get to you.
Yes.
Is it necessarily inconsistent with him having an angry conversation that by the time he got back to you, he looked crestfallen?
It's possible.
So you're relating the two, aren't you?
All I'm relating is my recollection
of what you saw when he got back to you.
Yes.
Yeah. And 60 Minutes weren't talking about that.
No.
And you don't know, Father, how long it was between the end of the phone call and when Bishop Pell came back into the room with you.
It wasn't a long call from what I can read, and he came straight back, so I'd say probably it was 10 minutes.
You couldn't hear when the call ended.
No.
So you don't know whether the bishop took a matter of minutes before he returned to your company.
No.
And if what David Ridsdale says about the call is true, then of course the cardinal would be, or the bishop as he was then, would be crestfallen because he'd been called out on his effort to, as it were, buy David Ridsdale off. Not so.
Amber.
I can't comment on that.
Well, that would be cause for being crestfallen, I suggest.
Mr. Stewart, there's a matter we'll have to attend to, or I'll have to attend to, I'm afraid. We might adjourn, if it's convenient now, and we'll come back at 2:00.
As right, please.